That's right, folks. Another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, Bobby LaMarco, and today we have another wide receiver matchup preview. That's right, the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis. We're going to break down who has the best and worst matchups on the outside and in the slot. Find some sleepers, some breakouts, some studs to play in DFS, all that and more on today's show, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And as always, helping me out, decipher through all the wide receiver matchups this week, it's Ben Wasley. You can follow him at Ben Wasley. At Fantasy First Down. No, on Twitter. What's going on, Ben?
What is happening? Thursday Night Football was crazy, but you know who predicted Logan Thomas going off this season? These guys. We did. We predicted the Logan Thomas breakout.
I got to say, Logan Thomas is one of those, where it's only week 4, right? Well, that was week 5. And I'm like, I don't want to get too excited about some of the calls because there were some bad ones in there. But Logan Thomas, I said multiple times, I'm like, if you're just going to take a dart throw on a tight end, it's Logan Thomas. So I think after week 5, we could comfortably say he's merging as a low-end tight end one consistently. It's a win. We'll take it. I love it. Let's start off on a positive note.
That's all in the W column.
That's why we love you, Ben. Starting the show on a positive note. Today, we're going to be breaking down some of the top wide receiver matchups, and we're going to talk about some matchup downgrades for some stud wide receivers. And on today's show, we want to make sure everyone knows that we're on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. Every Sunday, we do a Sunday live start-sit show for 2 hours where we answer your start-sit questions. We talk about the slot versus wide. We talk about all the best matchups, weather updates, injury updates, everything you need to know up until kickoff. So join us every Sunday live. But let's get into today's show. It's the top matchups for week 5. So if you're new to the show, what we do is we essentially take our points per game analysis. By the way, if you haven't checked it out yet, it's on razzball.com for free. Go to the fantasy data tab. It's fantasy points allowed by defense in the slot versus out wide. This is very important to understand that some players don't play in the slot. Some players just play out wide. So you want to know if a defense is allowing points to the slot or out wide because that's going to impact those players. And that's what we do on this show is we break that down for you. But if you want to see the full analysis to help with your start sits, go to razzball.com and click on the NFL tab and check it out. All right, as of course, the most important is the out wide matchups. These are where the studs play, and we want to find the studs with the best matchups. So that's why we go through the top 5 out wide matchups every single week. Could really help you with start sit questions, but also help you in DFS if you do play. Let's start at the top. Zay Flowers versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. We have the Chiefs going up against the Vikings. We also have the Jets versus the Broncos, the Rams versus the Eagles, and the Titans versus the Colts. So a lot of interesting names here. Some studs, some guys who are wide receiver 3s, and some maybe DFS dart those. But let's start with one of the emerging rookies who's kind of quieted down just a little bit over the last few weeks, but he does have a nice blow-up spot against the Pittsburgh Steelers that allow the most fantasy points out wide. So, Ben, what's your thoughts this week about Zay Flowers? We know Odell's coming back potentially. Rashad Bateman is already off the injured report. So what's your thoughts about Zay Flowers?
Safety, I guess, is the word I'd probably use with Zay Flowers. You're getting 50 to 90 yards every single week. You know what to expect. He's going to get plenty of targets, but he's not really finding the end zone. He's got no end zone targets. He's only got 4 red zone targets, and they went for a total of 6 yards. So realistically, you're not looking for big boom games. You're just looking at someone who you can put in your wide receiver 2 slot or in your flex spot and feel pretty good about it. I would be happy to start him, but I wouldn't be expecting a massive game out of him, especially with OBJ and Bateman back. You know they like to cycle those guys with Aguilar and Duvernay. So you're going to get starter production, but I don't think you're going to get top 12 production out of him this week.
So the interesting caveat to this whole situation is that when Beckham and Bateman were healthy, Zay Flowers played in the slot. So that hasn't been since halfway through week 2. And it's been Zay Flowers on the outside. So that is notable. I don't think Beckham and Bateman are going to play a full complement of snaps. So when you're looking at the games, though, the players that have dominated the Pittsburgh Steelers, Brandon Ayuk, Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Nico Collins. Now, the one thing I did notice is that there are air yards players. These guys get down the field. They attack downfield. That's where Steelers are vulnerable. Zay Flowers is more of a yards after catch guy. So there is a little bit of, he's not the apples to apples comparison number one as those other receivers are. So it does give me a little hesitation, but he plays on that left side over the last few weeks. If Beckham is not in the game, for example, he ends up playing more on the outside. I like him as a wide receiver 3 either way. I just think that the way you beat the Steelers is through the air right now. They have been very vulnerable over and over again. So I'm not going to overthink this one. And I'm going to give him a nod as a wide receiver 3, but I don't think he actually is a must start. So do come with your start sit questions on Sunday with Zay Flowers. Let's jump down to the number 2. It's the Chiefs versus the Vikings. Now, your guess is good as mine, guessing the Chiefs, who's the most prominent players, but just based on snaps, it's MVS and Watson. They play the most out wide, but you also have Sky Moore in there as well. What's your thoughts about this Vikings matchup that's been very good for outside receivers?
Yeah, look, I'm going to drop another name here. I'm going to go off the book. I'm going to go Rashee Rice is the guy that I'm interested in. And the reason is that he's getting so many red zone targets. He has more red zone targets than will Zay Flowers to start with. He's got 5 red zone targets, and he's playing like 15, 20 snaps a game. I don't know that I really want to start him this week, but he's a DFS option. Plus, he's someone I think you can stash on your bench if you've got an extra bench spot. But for DFS, I think he's really interesting because he does have that touchdown upside, because we know they'll use him. Now, he's not exactly perfect for this matchup, but realistically, the Vikings are just weak across the board in their secondary. So I'm interested in using him, interested in seeing where he gets used. But MVS and Watson, I don't know. I think they need one big play, but I'm not willing to take a shot on them.
You know, Ben, honestly, I think you might be my around the world twin. It's starting to get to a point where we're becoming yin and yang. It is what it is. I have literally in my notes, I pivoted throughout my research to Rashee Rice. So here's why. So I looked at some of the notable, first of all, number 1, the Vikings, 7th most fantasy points allowed to the slot. So it does, like you said, it doesn't matter. But here's some of the notable big games. Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen. Those guys have hybrid inside-out roles. They do play a lot in the slot. That's what I like about Rashee Rice, who plays majority of the snaps in the slot. However, yards after catch versus air yards. Minnesota is 6th in the NFL in yards after the catch. Rashee Rice has the 13th highest yards after the catch per reception in the NFL among qualified receivers. That's insane. They also do run about, I personally, so I was trying to look at man versus zone, trying to get some understanding about that stuff. Minnesota's kind of like league average, about 70% is zone, 30% man. Rice has been very good against zone. He's been very good. So knowing that they play a lot of zone, they are vulnerable after the catch. Give me Rashee Rice, wide receiver 3 sleeper this week. Hey, and ironically, if you had Keenan Allen on your team, throw in some Rashee Rice. Get him in your DFS lineups. I absolutely love it. Call my shot. All right. Let's jump down to the next one, who a couple weeks, just a week and a half ago, we wouldn't be probably even having this conversation because we just wouldn't care that much. But now, after a very surprising game against the Chiefs, Zach Wilson looks reborn. He looks pretty good. Now they get after that game, they get the Broncos, who have the 3rd most fantasy points allowed out wide. Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard. What's your thoughts about these guys heading into week 5?
Look, Garrett Wilson is an amazing talent. We know that. Unfortunately, Zach Wilson is the total opposite of an amazing talent. Don't get me wrong, he's better than me and he's better than everyone listening. But realistically, he's still, pretty mediocre for an NFL quarterback, and that's a concern. Having said that, they're still going to have to throw the ball against the Broncos. Everyone throws the ball against the Broncos. It's just what you do. You score points on the Broncos, you attack the Broncos attack you back, everyone has fun, and then we all win in fantasy. I think that means Garrett Wilson becomes this wide receiver 2 kind of option. He's getting a lot of red zone targets, getting a lot of end zone targets, and yet he's scoring very few points from them, but they're going to have to keep using him there. He's just so good. He's their number 1 target in all facets of the offense. So he's a start for me. He's a wide receiver 2. So is Breece Hall, by the way. Love Breece Hall this week as well as a running back 2. Alan Lazard, on the other hand, he's in like 2 or 3 targets a week or 2 or 3 catches a week. That's just not sustainable. That's not something you can rely on. I don't want to start Alan Lazard, even though he had a good game last week.
So I think the first thing we have to address is the Patrick Surtain conversation. And we were hesitant about DJ Moore last week a little bit, and sure enough, that did not go well for anybody. And so I wanted to give everybody a good answer why, because we have to address that, because Patrick Surtain is supposed to be this shutdown corner, but the Broncos are getting crushed on the perimeter. So I wanted to, that's just kind of led me down the rabbit hole of understanding, okay, how much zone versus man they play. So first off, I wanted to address the fact that 62% of the time the Denver Broncos play zone versus 38% man. And why is that important? Because if you line up across from Patrick Surtain and you just run a crossing pattern, he's not going with you. So it doesn't matter if you line up across Patrick Surtain if you're running crossers and posts and getting out of his zone. So I want to address that, and that's important. So that's why we have seen guys like Terry McLaurin score a touchdown, have a decent game, DJ Moore go off, and that's why I'm not concerned about the Patrick Surtain matchup as much as we probably were early on in the season. The other thing about this, too, is that the Denver Broncos allow the most yards after the catch in the NFL. They're sixth in air yards. Wilson has yet to really have that true breakout game, but if you look at the number one receivers against this Denver Bronco defense, it is almost a slam dunk that someone's going to go off. So I do think that Wilson, he moves all over the formation, by the way. Wilson doesn't just stay on one side. So he's
and a lot more of late as well. He's doing it a lot more of late. They've started to use Xavier Gibson out on the perimeter so they can move Wilson into the slot a lot more. So I think we'll see him in the slot a lot more this week as well.
Even better. So that's kind of the point. So I think that Wilson is in my DFS lineup. He's a locked-in wide receiver too. I actually have a Wilson stack in DFS lined up, folks. So I'm excited for that pain. As for Lazard, like you brought up, I just think it's the number one will dominate, and I think Wilson's the guy you want. Lazard, I'm not going to play around with this week. All right, let's go down to number 4. Some of this is going to be kind of the Cooper Kupp undertones, right? Like Cooper Kupp's coming back. The target vacuum is coming back. The good thing is what they have done for the Rams, at least for these two, Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell versus the Eagles this week, number 4. Sorry for people listening on the podcast side. I just assumed you were watching on YouTube. But the one thing that's good for these guys is Van Jefferson has moved to the slot. And if Kupp does take over his normal role, at least maybe Atwell and Nacua will still be the 2 and 3 in the offense, and Van Jefferson will take a back seat. I'm hoping for that because they are playing a lot better than him. Shout out to my awful sleeper take this offseason, but I had the right idea with the Rams, I guess. Let's just go with that. But yeah, the Eagles have allowed the 4th most fantasy points out wide, which is extremely surprising with Darius Slay. They have got beaten up by guys like Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans, and of course, Justin Jefferson kills everybody. But what's your thoughts about this matchup? Even if Cooper Kupp comes back, are you playing Puka Nacua? Are you willing to take a shot on Tutu Atwell?
Yeah, it's a weird one with the Eagles, and we're just starting to see it's where teams manage to find success against them is attacking the perimeter cornerbacks. I mean, it doesn't help that Josh Job's out there as one of their options, and he's not very good. Having said that, Darius Slay's not having a very good season either. He has these off seasons. He had a couple of years back. For most of his career, he's been very good, but he does have the occasional off year, and he seems to be having one this year. So that does mean that you can attack the Eagles secondary, especially out wide. Now, the real question is, how do the Rams choose to use their weapons now that they have Cooper Kupp back? Does he play a full snap count? I doubt it. But when he does play, who are they taking off? Is it Tutu Atwell? Is it Van Jefferson? That question makes Atwell a little bit scary. Having said that, the fact that Kupp's back and drawing more attention could open up a lot of opportunities for Atwell when he's on. So it can go either way, and it's really hard to know how to kind of rank these guys, and I've been up and down a lot with it. In the end, I've settled on having Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp quite high. Having said that, I'm going to be listening really carefully for reports on exactly where to put Cooper Kupp, but you have to start both of them for me. And I'm still putting in Tutu Atwell as a wide receiver 3, even though I'm worried about how he's going to get used. It's just they're going to have to play their best game against the Eagles. They're going to have to attack. That makes all of these guys really good options.
Yeah, and the best part is Puka Nacua lines up mostly on the right side of the formation. He's going to face a lot of Josh Jobe. And that kind of mirrors the Terry McLaurin usage if you look at both of them on PFF. And so 8 for 86 for McLaurin. We just saw what McLaurin did last night against the Bears. So clearly 8 for 86 is good for Terry McLaurin, apparently. So that's one thing. I don't know how that happened. But the one thing that is notable about the Eagles, they're 4th in yards after the catch allowed, 10th in air yards. And that kind of mirrors what Puka is. Puka is more of a yards after catch. He's 40th in yards after catch per reception, but 69th in ADOT. So he is a little bit more of a less ADOT guy, which fits his skill set. So I am all in on Puka. He's an elite matchup in my DFS lineups. I'm okay with paying up the price, even with Cooper Kupp back. I am all in on that. Atwell, I'm going to take a look. I can see Van Jefferson playing more than we expect. I know that sounds terrible to say, but like he's like the vertical threat that they like. His ADOT's like 18 yards, so he's very inconsistent. But he has a role in the offense that Tutu Atwell does have the speed for, but is he a big enough receiver to challenge defenses deep vertically? So maybe that's why Van Jefferson keeps his role. So I'm going to take a wait-and-see approach on Atwell. I'm all in on Puka Nacua for this week. Let's jump down to number 5. Whew, okay, so the Titans receivers. Number 5 is the Hopkins and Burks, the Tennessee Titans versus the Indianapolis Colts. And it's been a rough go. It's been a rough go for the Titans passing game this season. Burks is out this week, of course. Hopkins, in my opinion, this has got to be the week. This has to be the week. If you have Hopkins and you can't play him against the Colts, then what's the point of having him? Puka Nacua, 9 for 163-1. Nico Collins, 7 for 146-1. Ridley, 8 for 106-1. Just monster games from outside receivers. What's your thoughts about DeAndre Hopkins this week? Are you locking him in as a wide receiver 2/3 in your lineups?
Look, you have to start him. It's really unclear exactly what's going to happen here. It's entirely possible because their D-line's a little bit banged up as well that the Titans just go, oh, we'll just run. We've got Derrick Henry. We'll just run all day. That's possible. But having said that, I still think Hopkins is going to be involved. The question is, how many snaps does he play? He's been on a bit of a snap count of late, and that's a little bit scary. Having said that, the Colts secondary is, I mean, they're not bad, but they're just banged up. They've got Dallas Flowers on IR. Juju Brents is a rookie who's like a bit hot or cold. He was really good week 3. He was pretty poor week 4. Not sure who else is going to go out on the perimeter. Maybe they shift Kenny Moore out there and just go, screw it, we need someone good out there. It's really hard to know exactly what they're going to do, but you got to start Hopkins. You just absolutely have to. Plus, you start to think about other DFS dart throws like Nick Westbrook-Akine. Maybe they start to use him a little bit more because, again, if Moore moves outside, then he's going to be pretty open. Or maybe they use Chris Moore a lot more. We saw him surprisingly busy last week. So it's a bit hard to know exactly what's going to happen. There's opportunities here, though, guys you can take shots on, and you have to start Hopkins.
I am all in. Like, screw it. Let's do it. Let's let it ride. DeAndre Hopkins, I have him in my lineup. And here's kind of why. First off, if you look at how you beat the Colts, they're an air yards defense. So they're second in the NFL in air yards allowed. They're 13th in yards after the catch. So what is that? That mirrors exactly what DeAndre Hopkins is right now. He's 28th in air yards on the season, but he's only 90th in yards after the catch per reception. So that's not good, by the way. There was only like 98 qualified receivers, by the way. So 90th is really bad, but it fits the mold. Like the Colts are getting beat vertically. That's where Hopkins can beat you. Also, he lines up and has similar snap percentages as Ridley and Nico Collins. So I like that as well. It makes you feel comfortable starting DeAndre Hopkins. Get him in your lineups this week. I think he's a rock solid wide receiver 3, and you could even get away with him as a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. But before we jump down to the notable slot matchups, we do have a question from Lindorphins. Always a pleasure. And make sure you jump on to YouTube. We are live every Friday around 5:05-ish. Jump on Fridays, PM PST, and we break down these live. So if you have questions, feel free to jump on. What's up, guys? Can you rank Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle, and Nico Collins rest of season and half PPR, considering some trade options? Before you jump in, Ben, I do want to tell you that we do have rest of season strength of schedules now available on Razzball.com for slot and out wide. It is a fantastic trade tool and also a ranker rest of season for yourself. So go check that out. But Ben, what's your thoughts here about these 3 receivers?
I mean, you've got 2 guys who should be studs but aren't, and 1 guy who shouldn't be a stud but is. So it's a bit of an awkward situation. Waddle just hasn't been performing like he should be, but the upside is still there. We're talking about one of the best ever 2-year wide receiver runs from Jalen Waddle so far in his career. So you'd have to feel like he has that potential to bounce back, and for that reason, I'd have him ranked highest. Ridley, again, he was really hot week 1, but we're starting to think, maybe that was just the matchup. And for that reason, he and Nico Collins are real close for me. The fear with Nico Collins is we don't exactly know how he's going to go once CJ Stroud starts to get found out. He's had a good start to his rookie season, but rookie quarterbacks do tend to struggle, especially as teams start to work out their tendencies. So can you really trust him? I don't love any of these guys, but I'd have to go Waddle, then Ridley and Nico really close together, probably Nico slightly ahead.
Yeah, this is tough. So I'm looking at the resource right now, and it's funny. They're with their rest of season. These guys are all predominantly out wide guys, so they don't play a lot in the slot. And so their rest of season schedules are all below average. We have Miami at 19, Jacksonville at 23, Houston at 28, but they're all within a point of each other. So it's like very close, you know? I'm going to ride with the hot hand with Nico, and I'm actually going to put him slightly ahead of Ridley. I think Waddle just, oh God, I have so much Waddle. I can't stand it, but I can't. The offense, at some point, defenses are going to say, Tyreek Hill, you're not going to beat us. We're going to put 2 on you every time, and Waddle's going to have to start doing something, right? Just tell me yes, please, because
I believe you. I hear it. Yes, definitely. That's exactly what's going to happen.
I am so tired of Jalen Waddle. You have no idea. I can't with him. All right, let's get to some notable slot matchups. Here's where we kind of find some sleepers, maybe DFS dart throws in these matchups. And let's go through them. First off, it's Rondale Moore against the Bengals, Adam Thielen against the Lions, and Robert Woods against the Falcons. Let's talk about Rondale Moore first. Rondale Moore is facing a Bengals secondary that allows the 3rd most fantasy points to the slot. What's your thoughts on Moore this week? Would you really be willing to play him in DFS and or throw him in as a wide receiver 3?
I mean, the Cardinals have been one of the really pleasant surprises of the passing offenses in the NFL this year. We talked about the Rams, and the Cardinals have been up there. We didn't expect much from Josh Dobbs, but he's showing he can kind of produce with these guys. Marquise Brown's been pretty good. Michael Wilson broke out last week. So Rondale Moore, you'd think that makes him good, right? No, he has more rush yards than receiving yards this season. That's absolutely ridiculous. And he's only got 5 carries. It's just absolutely insane. They're not using him. He's got 12 targets for 8 receptions, 55 receiving yards. That's trash. That's really bad. I don't trust him. I'm not putting him in. He's only playing 60% of snaps. And when he's on there, they're not really using him. They're mostly going to guys like Zach Ertz in that part of the field. I think this could be a good game for Zach Ertz, if anybody. It's also worth noting that Cam Taylor-Britt has a concussion, so they might be weaker outside than they would have been otherwise. They'll probably just bring in DJ Turner. But it's still an area that they might look to target a little bit more than they would otherwise. So Rondale Moore is someone I'm not even slightly interested in.
So here we go. 0 shot. When I was looking into this, the matchup gives us a baseline of players to look at. So Rondale Moore, slot receiver, going up against the Bengals, great. Dive in deeper, though. The Bengals are 28th in the NFL in yards after the catch allowed. So they're insanely good. Like they're like top 5 defense in yards after the catch. Rondale Moore's ADOT is dead last. 2 + 2 = 4 sometimes, folks. A guy who doesn't get air yards, has to do everything after the catch versus a defense that doesn't allow yards after the catch, means you don't play him. No thank you. I'm willing to take an L on this one this week. No thank you. Let's move on. All right. Who would have thought week 5 we're headed in talking about the stud, the top 12 wide receiver stud, Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen gets another cupcake matchup against a Lions defense, who, by the way, we just found out Brian Branch, the slot cornerback, will not play this week. So just another feather in the cap. The Lions have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to slot receivers. Ben, what's your thoughts about this matchup? Are you getting Adam Thielen in your lineups this week?
I think you have to. I mean, look, CJ Gardner-Johnson was the guy that we really thought would be the slot guy. He's out. Brian Branch, love him. Good rookie. He's out. Emmanuel Mosley, the outside corner, also looking a little bit iffy with multiple injuries, like knees, hamstrings, everything's going on with him. This secondary is badly banged up. So you'd think that even though Carolina not looking great through the air in general, they're going to have to throw. They're going to be able to throw, and Adam Thielen has been the main beneficiary for that. I have no idea what's going to be happening on the outside. We don't know whether it's going to be Terrace Marshall or Jonathan Mingo, but Thielen is the guy they're going to use. Now, the only worry for me is that his slot snaps dropped a lot last week, and I don't know why. There seems to be no particularly good reason why they did that, but he was still really productive. So regardless of where they're putting him, he's making it work. He's a high-end wide receiver 3 for me. I feel like you can play him pretty confidently in your flex spot. It really just depends who else you have. Maybe you need to be kind of tuning into that start-sit show on Sunday morning.
There you go. I'm in. Brian Branch being out, just another feather in the cap. Home golf, by the way. Jared Goff playing in Detroit this week in nice dome weather against a very banged-up Panthers secondary. That means he'll get up points. And they got David Montgomery in that run game. So the Lions are going to score, which just means garbage, man. And I could get a bunch of garbage points for freaking Adam Thielen. That's what I want. So I don't care how it happens. That is the least catchy song I've ever sang in my life. I'll figure out a way to make the garbage man song more catchy. But all that Adam Thielen, get him into your lineups. He's producing like a wide receiver 1. It makes no sense. Don't ask questions. Just play the man. It's going to be fun. All right. The last notable slot matchup is actually a two-parter. And I'm actually going to blend two things together on you, Ben, on the spot, because it also factors in a notable out-wide downgrade in Nico Collins and also Tank Dell going up against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the Falcons have been absolutely stout against perimeter wide receivers this season. They are 30th in the NFL in fantasy points allowed out wide, while on the flip side, they're 5th in slot fantasy points allowed. So that leans Robert Woods. So what's your thoughts here? Are you willing to get cute and maybe start a Robert Woods in PPR formats and maybe sit Nico Collins? What's your thoughts here?
I think this is more of a matchup thing because realistically, even their slot cornerback, D. Alfred's been pretty good this season. Their whole secondary's been good this season. They've been a real positive standout when it comes to defenses that have kind of gone above what we expected. We knew AJ Terrell was pretty good, but the rest of the secondaries really stood up. Okuda's finally playing like a 3rd overall pick, which is great. Alfred's doing well. I really just like this secondary in general. I'm basically fading all Houston pass catchers. I don't really trust any of them, even though Woods technically has the better matchup. If you look at the slot players who've played against the Falcons so far, they're the big names on their team. We're talking about, look, Amon-Ra and Brown. Like, they're going to target him regardless of how the coverage is. That's why there's a lot of slot points there. We're talking about Adam Thielen. We talked about he's the main guy in Carolina. We're talking about Christian Kirk. We know that the Jaguars really made an effort to feature him in the last few weeks. And we're talking about the Packers, who use their slot guys quite a lot, especially with Jaden Reed. So I feel like this is more of a matchup issue that's happened in the past rather than a good matchup for future slot guys. I'm avoiding Robert Woods. Now, when it comes to the other guys, I think they're still okay options simply because we know Houston's going to have to throw the ball. It's not easy to run on the Falcons, and they've struggled to run well anyway with Dameon Pierce. So I feel like they're going to have to use one of Nico Collins or Tank Dell. Tank Dell's going to have to improve on last week. I'm probably more inclined to start Collins and Tank Dell over Woods, even though the matchup supposedly is better.
So Atlanta is according to my DVOA metric I use, they are the 3rd most pass funnel defense in football. It goes the Titans, Seattle, Atlanta. So it is tough to run against Atlanta, but it's easier to throw. I actually do like this in DraftKings formats. DraftKings is PPR. You got FanDuel, that's half PPR. I'm actually okay. Robert Woods is only $4,000 on DraftKings right now, and it's a PPR. I could see him easily getting you 2.5 to 3 times the value you need to get, in the money. So I'm good with him as a DFS dart throw. I am not ready to, I don't know. I'm not going to get cute with this one. I'm going to say wide receiver 4 if you need him. If you have guys like Keenan Allen on your roster, and let's say you have Amari Cooper and Keenan Allen as 2 of your receivers, and they're both on bye, and you have Robert Woods sitting there in a PPR league, throw him in. That's fine. He won't kill you. He'll probably get you 10 fantasy points, and that's fine. But I am not going to start him over studs, notable guys that I really like. All right, let's talk about some notable out wide downgrades. We already covered Nico and Tank Dell, but let's talk about some of those emerging guys. Brown and Wilson, the Arizona Cardinals duo on the outside, is facing that Bengals secondary. Now, I know Jacoby Uruzier is questionable. That could definitely help. But the Bengals have been very good against outside receivers. They're 29th in fantasy points allowed out wide. What's your thoughts about this matchup?
Yeah, I mentioned Cam Taylor-Britt earlier. I think that if he's out, then that's going to be a bit of a boon for these two guys. Having said that, the Cardinals have been pretty good to their outside receivers, and I feel like Josh Dobbs is playing a lot better than we expected. I'm starting Hollywood Brown. I'm just definitely starting Michael Wilson. Probably want to see 1 more week or 2 more weeks. They're still giving some of his snaps to Zach Pascal, which I don't love. So I want to see exactly how they're planning on using him and ensuring that this definitely just wasn't a fluke week. So for me, he's more of like a very low wide receiver 3. Break glass in case of emergency. Maybe you've got some bye week issues, rather than someone I definitely want in my lineup. So Wilson is getting the downgrade. Brown, I still kind of feel like you have to start as a low wide receiver too.
Full fade for me. I'm out. I'm out on the Cardinals. And here's why. There's a sweet angel named Puka Nacua out there. Here's Puka Nacua's stat lines this season. 10 for 119, 15 for 147, 9 for 163 and 1, 5 for 72. You know what that 572 came against? The Cincinnati Bengals. Don't mess around with these guys. No, thank you. I am out. All right, let's jump down to the last one. This is probably the biggest surprise. The Rams secondary, once they traded Jalen Ramsey, we all thought this is going to be a dumpster fire. Well, They have not been a dumpster fire, actually. The Rams' defenses look solid, and now they've been 31st in the NFL. So the second fewest fantasy points out wide allowed this season. And now they get this big-time matchup against the Eagles where they have to face A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. What's your thoughts here, Ben? Are you starting these guys? Are they auto starts? And are you playing them in DFS?
Yes, they're auto starts. You have to start AJ Brown. We've seen the last couple of weeks what he can do, but we also saw the first 2 weeks what he can do. He can have dud weeks. So he's not a given guy that's definitely going to give you production, but he's a guy you've got to put in your lineup because of that upside. It's going to be harder to access that upside against the Rams, but he's someone you have to play anyway. Devonta Smith's been one of those weird ones where he's got like 29 targets this season, which is pretty good, but he's not getting red zone targets. He's got 1 red zone target. Now, he scored a touchdown from it, and A.J. Brown has 5 red zone targets and no touchdowns, but they seem to still be going towards Brown and other guys in the red zone. They need to start using Smith there a little bit more, but the fact they should do something doesn't mean they will. That scares me a little with Smith. He has a little bit less upside, and this is a bad matchup. So he's more of a high-end wide receiver 2 than a wide receiver 1 that he can be certain weeks depending on the matchup. Because of the bye weeks, because of Amon-Ra and Brown being out, he does become one of those higher guys, but I don't feel good about him, and I don't feel confident about him. I just don't want to sit him either.
Yeah, I lean Brown over Smith here. And it kind of reminds me a little bit about the Seahawks situation when it was DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. DK found the end zone, but neither guy had a big game. It was 3 for 47 and 1 for DK, only 2 for 10 for Lockett. They've also shut down guys like Debo and Ayuk. Both didn't have big games against them. Michael Pittman had nothing against them. But Jamar Chase is interesting. He did have actually a very nice game, 12 for 141 against them, which is interesting. And A.J. Brown he lines up. If you look at where he lines up versus what Chase lines up, they line up almost exactly the same. Used a little bit in the slot, mostly out wide. I kind of like that. So I'm actually good with A.J. Brown as a wide receiver 2. And I actually think Smith's more of a risky wide receiver 3 this week. So I'm downgrading both those guys, and I'm fading them in DFS. All right, Ben, it's that time of the show where we give you the floor. We're going to let you tell the people about your weekly streamers and stashes. If you don't see the article, go check it out on Razzball.com. Ben writes it up every single week. Tell us a little bit about some of the wide streamers, quarterback, running back, you name it. You tell us. Go ahead.
I mean, look, you've already seen my quarterback streamer play this week. It was Sam Howell. And look, it was a bit of a dicey matchup, but he made it work, and we knew he would. There was always going to be that risk it would turn out that way. And look, he's definitely going to end up being a top 10 option this week after what happened. I really like Breece Hall this week. He's playing against the Broncos. Excellent running back matchup, excellent matchup in general. You got to start him. I think he's a legitimate option. Zay Flowers talked about earlier, and Garrett Wilson, they're guys for me. But in the tight ends, Tyler Higbee. Really like Tyler Higbee. He's playing so many snaps. You think Cooper Kupp coming back is a bit of a problem, but the Eagles have been really generous towards opposing tight ends this season. So he's someone that I want to be starting. He and Zach Ertz are both interesting options. Given the way that wide receivers could be used this week, it could give them some opportunities.
All right, before we close the show, we got a couple questions and a local favorite. Can't tell by his name, but Jolt and Flo, by the way, one of our favorite guys on Razzball.com. Thanks for joining us on the YouTube channel. What's on the Chill channel? I like that. Jolt and Flo, Chill channel. He's got a lot of good vibes, a lot of good names here. Wants to kind of ask a question similar to about the Chase Claypool signing with the Miami Dolphins and how that impacts Waddle potentially. I just view him as another Robbie Anderson personally. There's nothing Chase Claypool has shown us on a consistent basis, but does it give you any pause about Waddle, maybe even Tyreek?
No, Chase Claypool is at best a depth guy for them. I don't even think he's going to be a starter. I don't think he's taking over from Braxton Berrios. I think he'll probably get some snaps. He might get 20 or 30 snaps a week, but he's not someone I'm interested in fantasy. I don't see him really affecting Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill in any way whatsoever.
It's a low downside trade. Like for them, they swapped a 6th and 7th round pick to get a guy who's a former 2nd round pick who was traded for a 2nd round pick just 2 years ago, which is insane, by the way. They could have had like DeAndre Hopkins for a 2nd round pick, which is absurd in hindsight. But that's all we got today, folks. Once again, this is another episode of the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. We also have TikTok and IG, so jump over to Razzball Fantasy. And of course, go to Razzball.com. We have a lot of smart people over there, like Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down on Twitter, and go follow me at Bobby LaMarco. Thanks for joining us once again, folks. We are out of here.
Peace.